we had a couple features that y'all put up on DawgsHQ this week on some up-and-coming Bulldogs that weren't quite household names, but I know by this time next year, a lot of fans will like to think that they could be. One on defense, one on offense, Andrew Paul at the running back position, and Darris Smith. Let's just take a deep dive in some, speaking of rising stocks, let's talk about those guys. Let's start with Andrew Paul. And Roos, really, every time I think about this guy, I think about that first signing day when I was on the staff and you were on the ground talking to Andrew Paul. Palmer, you put some things together, and Ro, I know you've got your ear to the ground as well on this guy. What's the progress? What are we looking at here? How's he doing? And by this time next year, how do y'all expect him to be viewed as a part of Georgia's backfield?
I think you're probably I'll let you start. Late season guy. You know, I'm sorry, Palmer, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think probably looking more of a late season guy, just because of the nature of that injury. It did happen early in camp. I mean, that's just a tough position to play that with a torn ACL. So, I mean, I haven't heard a lot about his recovery. I think he'll probably be limited this spring. But in terms of when can he come on, I think that's usually kind of like a 24-month injury in terms of like getting back to your old self. So. I think it's probably reasonable to expect maybe, come, next October, November, that maybe he's starting to do a little bit more. Because that's probably also ultimately when Georgia's probably going to have a couple guys dinged up and they want to limit things for somebody else. And that's why Brandon Robinson kind of took some snaps there at one portion of the season when Kendall Milton was down. I think that's kind of what you're looking at this year out of him.
A 24-month injury, you think it is?
No, I just mean like to get back to your old self, like to be, to be vintage form. Because a lot of guys need two seasons. It's that second season back.
Yeah. I think that was the case for Chubb.
Yeah,
yeah, for sure.
I will say we don't know what the old form for Andrew Paul looks like at the college level because there is no old form of Andrew Paul at the college level. I'm very curious to see, and we never saw how his game translated from what he was doing in Dallas to what he can do in Athens. I'm very curious to see, and Roos, you talked to him, you got to see him in person. I'm very curious to see how he can contribute, if he can contribute as a pass catcher, because you look at Georgia's running back room and what they're losing in Kenny McIntosh. Kendall Milton is probably their best option as a pass catcher right now.
I would say Dejon Edwards.
Yes.
No
question. Yes.
No.
Absolutely.
He catches the ball well.
It's stock Sunday, and I'm stocked down on Dejon Edwards as a pass catcher.
I disagree completely. I'm with Roe on this one. To me, Dejon Edwards is the premier guy at the pass catching spot. I think we saw that in his high school film as well.
Yeah,
Andrew Paul showed some of that in his game and in his high school film and put up video game numbers. But we have to take into account that this is a private school league that he's playing in. So, that always skews things a bit. I'm not saying that they're bad players or it's a bad program or anything like that, but it does. It's not 7A ball each and every week. I mean, it's a different thing. But Paul was one of the most interesting guys, and especially one of those guys who, like Brett Seither, who exploded after the early signing period. I mean, just absolutely flew up charts. Nobody had heard of Andrew Paul on the Georgia beat until around that first signing period. And
well, that's my first round draft pick, Del McGee. It worked, guys.
Out of nowhere, this kid bursts onto the scene. The film's outstanding. The coach, gave glowing reviews. His high school coach, loved him, said he'd never coached a player like him, said he was a generational running back for their team. And that's all well and good at a high school level. But like Palmer said, we don't know how his game translates over. And is it a case, too, where – and obviously for Zamir, it was a much larger setback injury-wise. But, Zamir White – I had people tell me that Zamir White was the greatest high school football player they've ever seen in person.
Adrian Peterson was the comparison we always heard. He's the next AP.
Zamir White was a great player in college. He was a very good player. He was not Adrian Peterson, okay?
No.
So that changed things a lot for him. So we'll never know what Andrew Paul might have been. Now, who knows? Maybe he comes back better than ever before. Whatever we get is just what we'll get, and that's what we'll know of him. But how will that affect what we saw maybe in that high school film? I don't know that, and I'm intrigued to see. But there was some positive buzz, it felt like, around him in camp prior to that injury last year. I mean, there was I feel like I heard a few good things about, what he was doing. This was kind of a great late find was sort of the prevailing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it just keeps pointing back to the evaluation of this Georgia staff and the way they evaluate talent. And not that they're batting 1,000, every staff's going to miss on somebody here or there, but they do seem to find some diamonds in the rough. How about Darris Smith? Not exactly a diamond in the rough. You look at him, he's one of the guys you want hopping off the bus first, and he can hop really high too. If that kick in the national championship in my mind, it was the national championship. If that kick in the Peach Bowl semifinal was on target, he probably would have blocked it. And Palmer, you had a pretty interesting look at how his trajectory is looking right now going into spring. And his dad hops into the comments section pretty often. I don't know if he's in here tonight, but we're certainly grateful for his attendance and watching the show. And we're not just doing this because he pops in here every now and then, but his son could be a pretty big factor for the Dogs next season.
Yeah, so speaking about that kick, I asked him. I didn't include it in the piece because it probably wasn't necessary. Didn't really fit what I was writing there, but he told me he thought it would have been blocked if it had been straight. Looking back at the photos, having seen the film. He felt like it was going to get blocked. So, but I mean, Darris is very confident in his ability. And I think that's a great thing because you look at that Georgia edge rusher room and they're losing two big names, Robert Beal, Nolan Smith, two guys that have been very productive over the last few seasons. Beal, the forgotten sack leader from the 2021 championship team. Nolan was off to one hell of a start in 2022, had 7 tackles for loss in 8 games, 7 straight games when he went down against Florida. And he was on a tear in that Florida game. Very well could have ended up with more in that game and on down the line. Certainly, Darris told me he thinks he has the potential to be the best pass rusher on this team. And that says a lot when you've got Mykel Williams coming off the edge, as a defensive end. When you've got guys like Marvin Jones, 2 of his classmates in that 2022 signing class. Darris, sees the comparisons, to the former players, understands the athleticism and that he has, and understands the need for him to grow and develop that athleticism. That's why he was very willing to work at Star. He spent a good bit of the snaps and in practice and such. He was developed as a pass rusher already knew how to do that, needed to develop the zone coverage skill. So spent some time with the defensive backs, worked on that, and really wants to become an all-around player. I am, I said I was stocked down on Daijun Edwards' pass catching ability. I am stocked up on Darris Smith and his pass rush ability.
I freaking love Darris Smith. I'm a huge Darris Smith guy. All right. I think that this is a breakthrough year for Darris Smith. I think he has all the tools. It will not be lack of athleticism that keeps Darris Smith off of the field. All right. If it's going to be anything, it's going to be about scheme, that kind of thing. Anthony White over here says can be the next Leonard Floyd. I think he has that kind of upside.
And that's I'll don't mean to interrupt, but that's a name that Kirby told Darris. Kirby mentioned Darris. Hey, Leonard worked at Star some. Got some reps there, and so that was part of the reasoning why he wanted him to develop at that position.
Well. And listen, Adam Anderson. The expectations were through the roof. What happened with him. I think that Darris Smith can be what Adam Anderson was supposed to be, and was on the trajectory to be. Now, I'm not going to say that he can reach that level in year 2. I don't know that that's the case. I think that there may still be some time to go, but I think as the overall as his career progresses, Darris Smith is going to probably find himself. It would not surprise me to see a first round pick. I think you're talking top 2 to 3 rounds over the course of his career. Kid has every measurable you can go for. You can the speed, the size. It's just about picking up the game and putting the pieces together. I think that may have hampered him a little bit last year, if we're being honest about it. But I think that, listen, you're coming from Appleton County, and they play some good ball down there, but that ain't SEC football. All right, so it's a little bit different world down there. Darris Smith, one of the more rare athletes, I think, to come out of Appleton County in a bit as well. And I'm very, very high on his chances over the course.
Yeah, well, I mean, those are names that show up in the comments section. That's not why I wanted to include them in the show tonight. Palmer picked up a lot of that this week, and I'm just kind of following the lead of that work. So great job, Palmer dog. But I think it's worth it. I think these guys and these profiles on names that will have an impact, should have an impact, provided they stay healthy. And of course, I think Darris's dad being a part of the show as often as he is, I wanted to tip my cap to him, but he also deserved it.